Hello everyone, Kaibora here, and in this video I will be going over the best budget guns once you have access to the flea market. This is a hugely debatable topic and can be determined by many different factors and criteria. I will be basing my choices off of the cost of the gun, with the cost of the modifications, and the cost of the ammo. Since ammo is the biggest factor when using a gun, some guns are cheap, but the ammo you need to be effective with that gun can go for 2k rubles per round, which can be astoundingly expensive, especially over time. Anyways, here is my first gun choice. Some of you are going to be like, oh no, please, not the SKS. I just got flea market. I'm level 10. I want to graduate from the SKS. Well, let me tell you, the SKS is still one of the best guns to use, even in the late game. I'm going to treat this as if you guys already have workbench level 1 constructed in your hideout, because you are level 10, you have access to the flea market, you have the ability to already have it assembled, but if you don't, I recommend getting it assembled as soon as possible, and I'm going to use the edit preset tab so I can go over the gun easier to show you the modifications. So the first thing you want to do is at least go to a 20 round mag. They have 35 rounders, but they can be on the pricey side sometimes, but a 20 rounder will do you just fine. Then you're going to go to here, set the front stock, and get the SKS SOCOM rail mount. This allows you to put a sight on the gun. You can't put long range sights, it's going to only be like red dots and holographics. But I recommend use the Hollow Sun reflex sight because it's relatively cheap, and to me this sight works best when it's on the front of the gun. You do have options to put flashlights on it. That's preference. If you have extra laying around, go ahead. I don't feel it's necessary unless part of your strategy is to blind people with a flashlight, but for a single fire gun, I don't feel that it's a requirement because you're not going to be spraying too much in the hip fire or point fire stance. So this is really all you need. Yes, there's an option to put silencers on it, but it's supposed to be budget. Silencers can be expensive even though they're very useful, but for something like this is all you need to focus on. But if you want to get the OPSKS, which is also known as the hunting rifle version, this one allows you to put a dovetail mount, but it can go for a little bit more money. So this one on the flea market already comes with the dovetail mount, which just allows you to attach a sight to it. Now, I recommend to use this one if you want to go for longer range. You can put a nice cheap 4x scope on it. Or if you don't really like having the front mount of the other SKS, you don't have to put this on this unless you want to add a flashlight, which I don't think is necessary, and then this adds extra cost that is not important. Use this to put one on the back. This one is one of my favorites to use, but this one is even cheaper, and you can get it from proper level 1, and it actually has positive ergonomics because you add this Cobra shade to it. The ammo is really good for being so cheap. Level 1 proper sells it for 91 rubles a round, and it's still effective. Even the best in tier ammo for the slot, right now it's pretty pricey, but sometimes it averages around 900 to 1,000 rubles a round, which in comparison to some other ammos that are in the top tier for other types of calibers, it's actually really cheap in comparison. The next gun I want to show you is the Hunter. This is also still a really good gun to use because it has access to M80 rounds, which are still relatively cheap and still really effective. I definitely recommend having a 10 round magazine in though, kind of like this one already does, but make sure that you buy several of these. These can sometimes be expensive, but it's well worth it. And you can do the same thing almost as you can with the OPSKS. You could just automatically put a sight on it like this. That's if you want close range. I definitely recommend to not use the silencer because the silencer could be ridiculously expensive. And it's also really long, so it can make the gun even longer and more unwieldy, kind of similar to the MP153. But same thing is the OPSKS. you can use a 4x scope. And I didn't show this with the OPSKS just because of the fact that this is the cheaper budget way to go, but you can put a side mount like this, and then you can even put additional types of sights. But a lot of these other sights are more expensive, and then, it starts to not become budget anymore unless you really do prefer it. Like, usually the Elcan is pretty good in between for using like a 1 to 4 times without using like a side mount, because I personally like to use these scopes and I don't mind shooting through the 1 times because it's still really close. But then the price starts to jump up a little bit. Make sure you grab a couple of these 10 round magazines, focus on just getting M80. It's gonna still get the job done in almost every situation, and it's really affordable. The next gun I'm going to show you is actually one of my personal favorites. It is the AK-74M. You'll also see there's an AK-74N, and there's also just an AK-74. But the AK-74M actually has the best stats between the 3 of them. Just the raw stats are just better. Swap out the compensator for the DTK-1. You're going to swap out the handguard for the CAARS-47. All you're going to add to is an RK5. You're going to keep the buttstock, but you're going to add the butt pad to it, which reduces the recoil severely. You'll see now you're already down to 69 recoil, which is pretty decent, especially for a budget gun. There are some other tweaks that you can add to it, like if you really want to add just slightly more recoil reduction, you can add a bastion. You'll have to take this off, and then you can put the bastion on, and it puts it further by -1. But that can be unnecessary money spent because you can already put a close range sight on the front already. Again, I would choose to use this. Make sure to put this on. If you're exactly at level 10, you might not have some of the dealer stuff unlocked, but a lot of this stuff you can get from the dealers at level 2, which is even more cheaper than the flea market. But even then, it's not that horrible. I would just upgrade to this. If you aren't a fan of having the sight on the front of the gun, just make sure you remove the rear sight, and then you can swap this for a bastion, and then you're free to put whatever scope you want on here. I'm choosing this one because it's cheap and it's all about being budget. You can do the same thing with the AK-74 and the AK-74N if you want. The stats are going to be close, but the AK-74M does win out slightly more. And if you want to go for a longer range scope, I recommend to go for the Elcan. It's just one of the cheaper ones that gives you both close range and long range capabilities. Also, if you do have workbench level 1, you can actually craft a AK-74N. It doesn't need too much. It's actually really cheap to craft. That's the M. You can craft that at level 2. There's also a barter to proper when you have him level 2 for 5 packs of Apollo cigarettes. And this is a lot of people's favorite early, accessible, and cheap round. Now you're wondering, why did I go to BT? So BP right now is pretty cheap, but for some reason, everyone thinks it's like a really good round for 5.45, and it's not bad, but BT is better, and it usually hovers around 300 rubles a round, like you see here. But BP right now is low, but usually it's not this low. BP sometimes goes for more than BT, and it's not even a better round. But sometimes it's like 400 to 500 a round, and it's not worth it. BS and a Goldnik are way more expensive, but they are a better round. But I recommend, if you're doing budget, just to stick to BT. It usually is enough to get the job done. The next gun I'm going to go over is the AKMS. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm not doing the AKM. Because usually, even though this right here is on the cheap side, usually it's around 40k to buy it, where the AKMS hovers around the 21k mark. Also, the AKMSN also hovers even cheaper right now, but that usually averages about the same as well. You would want to use the AKMSN if you can, because it has a dovetail mount, kind of like the OPSKS and the Hunter. But I'm going to select the AKMSN to edit the preset with, but I'm going to modify it as if it was just an AKMS, because the AKMS is a little bit more common and you can get it off scavs. The first thing you're going to want to do is change out the handguard, just like the AK-74M. You're going to want to put the RK5 forward grip on it, just like the AK-74M. You'll swap out the compensator for either of these three because they can all hover roughly around the same flea market price. This one is generally cheaper, so we'll go with this one for this build. Then make sure to put a butt pad on, and you can swap out the pistol grip. In this one, you're at 98 recoil because it's an AKM, which has high recoil to begin with because it's 7.62 by 39 caliber. But this is particularly good if you're going for the AKM kills on shoreline. That's an early on task, and you can add a front sight on it. Again, I go with this, but if you want, you can put on a bastion to put a sight on the back. But this, if it's for the AKMS. You can do it for the AKMSN, but there's really no need to because it has the dovetail mount. So you can put one of these on it. You see you can't put it on with the bastion. So if you kept the normal dust cover, you can see that you can just add on the dovetail. And there you go. And this is the only ammo you have to worry about using. See, right now it's even cheaper than the one you can get from Proper. But even at 91 rubles a round, it's still really cheap and it's still really good. You can go for BP, 7.62 by 39 BP, if you want, even though it can be on the pricey side. And even though it usually hovers around 900 to 1,000 rubles per round, it's on the high end right now. Because it is a good round. But you can get the job done with 7.62 by 39 PS just fine, just like the SKS. I'm going to now go over one of my personal favorites, because I love the Saiga 12 gauge. It's really affordable, and even though you might not have access to the cheap ammo from Jaeger, because you don't get Flechette until you have him unlocked at level 3, and you don't get AP-20 until level 4 Jaeger. If you want, you can try to put this muzzle brake on. Want to try to use the 10-round magazines. They can end up being expensive, but make sure you put recoil pad on because they're fairly cheap. And in order to put a sight on it, you can put one of these three on. I recommend to go between these two. These should be on the relatively cheap side, and it allows you to put a decent sight on. Now, for the Saiga, I actually wouldn't go with my normal sight. I would probably go with a nice holographic, but because we're doing budget, you can just go with the simple EKP. And with this handguard, you can put the RK5 on it. A quick note is sometimes these 10-round magazines can actually be quite expensive, but they also take up a 1x3 slot, so there's only a couple rigs that will actually hold the magazine. My favorite one to use with is the Alpha rig, because it will hold the 1x3 magazine, but that can also become expensive to regularly run that rig with the mags. If you have to use the 5-round mags, just learn how to manage your shots properly so that you don't run out of ammo. As far as shotgun ammo that you want to use, I recommend and personally love Flechette ammo. Once you have Jaeger level 3 unlocked, you get it for super cheap, but even without that, it still goes for pretty cheap. Also AP-20 slugs that you can get from way cheaper from Jaeger level 4 than you can from the rest of the flea market. So I wouldn't really bother spending that price on that. But if you want to, you can. Another good ammo to look at is Magnum Buckshot. That can be really cheap, and you can get it from Jaeger earlier on. A shotgun ammo that is actually underrated is the Express Buckshot that you can also get from Jaeger. I want to make special mention of the VSS. The gun itself does range on the higher end, but the special thing about this gun is that you actually don't have to spend too much money on upgrading and modifying it. I will recommend to try to at least go for a 20-round magazine. They're fairly not that expensive. The 30-round magazines, they go for anywhere from 30 to 40, sometimes 50k if you don't have the dealer unlocked. So I would recommend just keep the 20. Now it does have a high rate of fire, so you will burn through it very fast. But it does have a dovetail mount, so you can put a long-range scope on if you desire by adding a Cobra, for example, and then you can put something else longer range. But to keep things simple and cheap, we'll just go with the good old-fashioned EKP. Put the Cobra shade on, and boom, you're good to go. The recoil is still fairly low, and you don't really have to modify it anymore. Now just be careful, the rate of fire is really high, so that 20-round magazine will go through really quick. But the good thing about it is even the lowest ammo for it is relatively really cheap, and it's actually still really good. If you have it unlocked from proper, you can purchase him from the cheapest as of right now, but even without him, it's still really good ammo for how cheap it is. Thank you for stopping by. I hope my guide has helped you out to understand some effective yet budget-based builds that will lead to your success in future raids. I appreciate you as an audience, and thank you for your support. And yet, once again, good luck escaping from Tarkov.